Hello everyone. This story follows a girl no one dares to approach, the kind of presence that silences a room without effort, and the unexpected way she alters someone else's life completely. It moves through intensity, quiet protection, raw vulnerability, and a closeness that neither of them ever planned to feel. The campus library floor had a reputation for being merciless. A wide stretch of dull, speckled linoleum carried the sharp scent of bleach mixed with aging paper and the quiet despair of overworked students. I knew that far too well because my face hovered just inches above it, my vision dissolving into a storm of black spots. My heart pounded wildly, uneven and frantic, like something desperate to escape my chest. Every attempt to breathe felt shallow and useless, as if the air itself had thinned beyond reach. The towering bookshelves seemed to tilt inward, their shadows bending under the harsh flicker of fluorescent lights. Exhaustion had been creeping up on me for days, and now it finally took hold. 3 days with barely any sleep, fueled by lukewarm coffee and stale granola bars buried in my bag. The weight of my scholarship pressed down relentlessly, demanding flawless performance just to keep my place at this impossibly expensive university. There was no room for mistakes, no space for weakness, but my body had reached its limit and refused to keep going. The last clear moment lingered in fragments, my hand stretching toward a heavy textbook on the top shelf, my fingers brushing its worn spine. Then the sudden crash of nausea, violent and overwhelming. The world lurched sideways, the light smeared into blinding streaks, and a piercing ring swallowed the silence. My knees gave out without warning, fear spiking sharply as control slipped away. I braced for impact, for the hard collision with the floor, but it never came. Instead, everything shifted. Strong hands caught me, pulling me back before I could fall. The first thing that broke through the haze wasn't sight, but scent, clean and sharp, carrying hints of bergamot, cedarwood, and something darker like polished leather touched by rain. It didn't belong in the dusty stillness of the library. It was cold and precise, yet the body holding me radiated a steady, grounding warmth. A soft gasp escaped me as I was drawn against a firm chest, my head falling back against a shoulder wrapped in thick fabric. A voice followed, low and smooth, edged with quiet authority that left no space for resistance. It vibrated through me, sending a strange shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold air around us. My eyelids felt impossibly heavy, but I forced them open, struggling to focus on the face above me. Dark hair framed sharp features that looked almost sculpted, high cheekbones, a defined jaw, and eyes the color of a storm, intense and unyielding. They studied me with a focus that felt almost clinical, as if nothing escaped their notice. Recognition hit like a second wave of dizziness. Sloan Kensington. The name alone carried weight. She wasn't just known, she was whispered about. An untouchable presence moving through campus like something carved from a different world. Wealth and influence followed her, but it was her aura that kept people at a distance. Cold, precise, and utterly unapproachable. Stories surrounded her, each one sharper than the last. Professors losing positions after crossing her, reputations dismantled with quiet efficiency. No one challenged her, no one even tried. And now I was sprawled against her, my scattered belongings strewn across the floor, my head resting against her collarbone. An apology scraped weakly from my throat, dry and unsteady, but she cut it off before it could fully form. Her tone was calm, firm, and absolute. There was no room to argue, no space to pretend everything was fine. Her hand moved to my face, fingers cool against my flushed skin. The contrast was startling. Her touch was careful, almost gentle, completely at odds with the ruthless image everyone believed in. Her thumb brushed lightly along my cheekbone as she assessed me with quiet precision, listing the signs of exhaustion like undeniable facts. I tried to push myself up, insisting weakly that I had work to finish, something important due. My body refused to cooperate, every muscle slack and unresponsive. Her response came without hesitation, blunt and effortless, as if my priorities meant nothing in the face of what she had already decided. Before I could protest further, she moved. One arm slipped beneath my knees, the other secured around my back, and in a single smooth motion, she lifted me off the ground. The sudden shift left me stunned, a small sound escaping before I could stop it. Instinct took over, my hands gripping her coat just to steady myself. She adjusted her hold, firm and unyielding, her voice lowering into something quieter but no less commanding. Resistance felt pointless. The certainty in her tone made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. The world blurred again as she carried me through the library, the steady rhythm of her heartbeat pressed against my side, strong and controlled. There was power in the way she moved, effortless and precise, and yet there was something else beneath it. A steadiness that wrapped around me, anchoring me despite everything. I felt small, completely exposed, and yet strangely safe all at once. The contradiction settled deep, unsettling and undeniable. Without thinking, I leaned closer, drawn to the warmth she gave off, letting it pull me under as the darkness finally claimed me. When awareness returned, it came slowly. The harsh lights and suffocating silence of the library had been replaced by the soft hum of medical equipment. A sterile calm filled the air. I lay in a hospital bed, crisp sheets beneath me, an IV line feeding fluid steadily into my veins. The dizziness had eased, leaving behind a heavy, bone-deep exhaustion. Turning my head carefully, I took in the quiet room, and froze. Sloan sat in the corner, composed and still, a book resting in her hands. Without her coat, the simplicity of her dark sweater softened her silhouette, though nothing about her presence felt diminished. The light traced the sharp lines of her face, giving her an almost unreal quality, like something pulled from a painting and placed into the room. As if sensing the shift, she closed the book and looked up. Her eyes met mine, steady and unreadable. Silence stretched between us, thick with something unspoken, something that made the air feel heavier. Lying there, exposed and unguarded, I felt every inch of that gaze. Then finally she spoke. Her voice was quiet, stripped of its earlier edge, carrying a subtle shift that was almost imperceptible. "You're awake. How long have I been here?" The words scraped out of my throat, thin and unsteady, barely sounding like my own voice. "A few hours." Sloan rose from her chair and crossed the room, each step measured, controlled, impossible to ignore. She stopped beside the bed, looking down at me with that same unflinching focus. "The doctor said it was severe exhaustion, dehydration, and malnutrition." Her tone calm but edged with something sharper. My blood sugar had dropped to a dangerous level. She wanted to know why I had been pushing myself that far, not accusing, but demanding honesty in a way that made lying feel impossible. The energy to hide the truth simply wasn't there. The words came out low and uneven as I stared at the blanket instead of her eyes. I had a scholarship. If my GPA slipped below a 3.8, it would disappear, and with it any chance of staying here. Midterms had piled up, a research paper looming over everything, extra shifts at the dining hall just to cover textbooks. Somewhere in the chaos, eating had stopped mattering. Time blurred, priorities narrowed, and food became something I kept meaning to get to. "You forgot to eat." She repeated it slowly, disbelief settling into every syllable. A quiet admission followed, heat rising to my face. 2 days, maybe 3, silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. Expectation curled tight in my chest, waiting for judgment, for the cold indifference everyone associated with her. Instead, a sharp breath broke through it. When I looked up, her jaw was locked, tension flickering through her expression. Anger unmistakable but not directed at me. "That ends now." Her voice dropped, softer but carrying a dangerous weight that made my breath catch. It wasn't a suggestion. A quiet protest slipped out, fragile and strained under the reality pressing down on me. There were limits she couldn't understand, circumstances she had never had to face. The words faltered before they could fully form. She finished them for me anyway, her voice steady, untouched by offense. She knew exactly what separated us. She knew what privilege looked like and where she stood within it. That awareness didn't soften her stance. If anything, it hardened it. Allowing someone to starve themselves on her campus was not something she would tolerate, and she made it clear that it would not happen again. Confusion settled in, cutting through the exhaustion. Her intensity didn't make sense. There was no reason for her to care this much, no connection that justified it. The question slipped out before I could stop it. She tilted her head slightly, her gaze locking onto mine with a force that tightened something deep in my chest. Then she spoke my name, followed by details I hadn't realized anyone noticed. My major, my year, the exact seat I took in a specific lecture, the way I drank my coffee, the nervous habit I never managed to hide. Each piece landed with quiet precision, dismantling the distance I thought existed between us. Shock left me momentarily speechless, the realization settling in too slowly to grasp all at once. Her answer came without urgency. She reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair away from my forehead, her fingers light but deliberate. The contact sent a sharp, electric pulse straight through me. Her gaze dipped briefly before returning, steady and unreadable, and she admitted it in the simplest way possible. She noticed things. She had noticed me. The meaning lingered between us. heavy and impossible to ignore, stirring something both thrilling and deeply unsettling. It might have stayed there longer if the door hadn't opened, breaking the moment apart. A nurse entered with easy cheerfulness, her presence slicing through the charged silence. Sloan stepped back immediately, the shift instant and complete. The softness vanished, replaced by the composed, untouchable exterior everyone recognized. The nurse moved through routine checks, her voice light as she explained that the fluids were nearly finished and I would be discharged soon. Instructions followed: food, rest, a promise to take care of myself. I agreed, my voice still unsteady. Attention shifted to Sloan, the assumption of familiarity slipping naturally into the conversation. Before I could correct it, before I could explain that we weren't anything to each other, Sloan answered smoothly. She would take me back. The IV was removed, and I eased myself upright, my body still unreliable, balance uncertain. The moment I wavered, she was there, her hand steady at my elbow, grounding me without drawing attention to it. We left the clinic together in silence. The night air hit sharply, cold enough to make me shiver through the thin fabric of my sweater. She paused, unbuttoned her coat, and without hesitation draped it over my shoulders. It swallowed me completely, heavy and warm, carrying her scent in a way that felt far too intimate for something so simple. A quiet protest slipped out, more reflex than conviction, but she dismissed it with calm indifference. She didn't need a reason. The car waiting in the lot gleamed under the dim lights. She opened the door, waited until I was settled, then closed it with quiet precision. The drive passed in silence, but it wasn't suffocating. It felt weighted, thoughtful, filled with things neither of us said. Outside the window, campus lights blurred into streaks, and with them, every assumption I had about her began to unravel. The stories didn't match the reality I had just lived through. The cold figure everyone feared didn't align with the person who had carried me, waited for me, and wrapped me in her coat without hesitation. When the car stopped outside my worn-down dorm building, she didn't move right away. Instead, she turned toward me, resting her arm against the steering wheel, her expression unreadable in the low glow of streetlights. Her voice dropped, quieter, but more intense than before as she repeated herself. No more skipped meals, no more pushing until collapse. Agreement came softly, uncertain but sincere, even as responsibility lingered like a shadow I couldn't shake. Her jaw tightened slightly. She reached into the console and pulled out a black card, holding it out to me. It carried access to every place on campus where food existed, unrestricted, unlimited. I stared at it, resistance rising immediately. Pride flared despite everything, refusing to accept what felt too much like pity. She shut that down just as quickly, her gaze sharpening. It wasn't charity. It was something else entirely. The challenge slipped out before I could stop it. Her answer came without hesitation, leaning closer just enough to close the distance. It was for her peace of mind. The thought of seeing me like that again stirred something in her she didn't bother to hide. The edge in her voice softened at the last moment, the single word that followed carrying a quiet vulnerability that broke straight through my defenses. My hand moved before my thoughts could catch up, taking the card from hers. Gratitude came out in a whisper, overwhelmed and unsteady. When I tried to return her coat, she stopped me gently, insisting I keep it for now. There was an ease in the gesture, as if it had already been decided. Outside, the night felt different. I stepped away from the car slowly, the weight of everything settling in as I climbed the steps toward my dorm. A glance back showed her still there, waiting until I reached the door before finally pulling away. The days that followed blurred together in a strange, unfamiliar calm. Sleep came first, deep and uninterrupted, pulling me back from the edge I hadn't realized I'd been standing on. When I woke, the exhaustion had lifted, replaced by a restless energy that refused to settle. The card sat on my desk, the coat draped over my chair, both impossible to ignore. Every glance at them stirred something complicated, something I couldn't quite name. 3 days passed without seeing her. Part of me wondered if it had all been a moment that meant nothing to her, something she had already moved past. That distance should have been comforting, a return to normal, but it wasn't. Instead, it left behind a quiet, unexpected disappointment that lingered longer than it should have. By Thursday afternoon, I found myself in the corner of a crowded campus cafe, staring down the research paper that had nearly destroyed me, trying to focus while everything else refused to settle. I sat locked into my laptop screen, the world shrinking down to lines of text and blinking cursors. A half-eaten sandwich rested beside me, bought with Sloan's card, and every bite carried that strange, tangled mix of guilt and quiet gratitude I still didn't know how to sort through. The cafe buzzed with noise, voices overlapping, chairs scraping, the sharp hiss of the espresso machine cutting through it all. I was so deep in my work that the shift in the room didn't register at first. Then the volume dipped. Conversations thinned into murmurs. Something invisible moved through the space, tightening it, drawing attention toward a single point. I pulled out my headphones and looked up. She stood at the entrance. Sloan looked like she didn't belong to this place at all, like she had stepped out of something far more polished and deliberate, and into a world that felt suddenly smaller because of it. A tailored black blazer framed her perfectly, layered over a dark turtleneck, every detail precise. The crowd parted around her without hesitation, instinctively giving her space. No one spoke directly to her, but everyone noticed. Her expression remained composed, unreadable, her gaze sweeping the room with detached calm. Then it found me. Everything else fell away. Time seemed to stretch as she started walking, her attention fixed, unwavering. She didn't acknowledge the whispers or the way people shifted aside. There was a quiet intensity in the way she moved, controlled and purposeful, like nothing existed beyond where she was headed. Straight toward me. My pulse spiked, loud in my ears. I suddenly became aware of everything I hadn't noticed before. My messy hair, the worn fabric of my sweatshirt, the ink smudged across my fingers. I stayed frozen as she reached the table and stopped beside me. Her eyes flicked to my laptop, then to the sandwich. "Turkey and Swiss," she murmured, low enough that no one else could hear. "Acceptable, but lacking." She noted it with casual precision, already calculating what I should have chosen instead, her tone almost clinical. The normality of the comment caught me off guard, disarming in a way nothing else about her ever was. A faint shift touched her lips, barely there, but unmistakable. The first hint of something softer, something almost like amusement. It transformed her face in an instant, making her seem less untouchable, more real, and far more dangerous in a completely different way. She slid into the booth across from me without waiting, setting her bag aside with quiet ease. The entire cafe seemed to hold its breath, the weight of attention pressed in from every direction, curiosity and speculation building in waves. The girl no one noticed, sitting face to face with the one everyone avoided. It was the kind of moment people would dissect for days. I shrank back slightly, instinct pulling me inward, trying to disappear under the pressure of it. Sloan didn't even glance at them. The shift in her posture alone cooled the space around us, a silent warning that needed no words. They didn't matter. None of them did. Her focus returned to me, sharp and unwavering. The change in her voice followed just as quickly, the edge gone, replaced by something quieter, more attentive. She studied my face, noticing things I hadn't realized were still visible. The lingering exhaustion, the pale undertone I couldn't quite shake. The question wasn't spoken, but it lingered in her expression, steady and insistent. I told her I had been sleeping, more than I had in days, and the words felt steadier this time. Gratitude slipped in naturally, tied to the card, to the coat, to everything she had done without hesitation. I reached into my bag and pulled the coat out, placing it carefully between us. She glanced at it, then back at me. It wasn't coming back. The refusal was immediate, effortless. It belonged with me now, as if that had always been the plan. I tried to argue, the cost alone enough to make it feel impossible to accept, but she leaned forward slightly, and something in her expression shifted. The edge returned, not harsh, but firm, immovable. Money didn't mean anything in this conversation. The decision had already been made. There was no space to push against it. The words faded before they could fully form, caught by something deeper in her gaze. For a brief second, something unguarded flickered there, something that felt too close to vulnerability to ignore. It wasn't something she would say out loud, but it was there, asking me not to refuse. I gave in quietly, pulling the coat back toward me. Aproval softened her voice when she spoke again, the tension easing as she leaned back. Then she shifted the focus entirely, bringing the conversation back to the paper that had driven me to the edge. What followed didn't feel like anything I expected from her. She listened, not with polite detachment or bored tolerance, but with real attention. As I explained my research, she stayed engaged, asking questions that cut straight to the core of my arguments. She understood it, challenged it, pushed it further. There was a sharpness to her mind that matched everything else about her. Precise, intense, impossible to ignore. Time slipped by unnoticed. When my phone buzzed, it startled me, pulling me back into reality. I glanced at the screen and realized how long we had been sitting there. The next class loomed, and I hurried to pack my things, a quiet sense of reluctance settling in as the moment ended. She stood as smoothly as she had arrived, already gathering her bag. She was coming with me. The protest came automatically, fueled by the awareness of eyes still following us, of the stories already forming. It didn't matter to her. It never did. She stepped closer, closing the space between us, her hand lifting to adjust the collar of my sweatshirt. The brief brush of her knuckles against my neck sent a sharp warmth through me, unexpected and impossible to ignore. The choice rested with me, offered without pressure but framed in a way that made it clear she would accept whatever I decided. I met her gaze, saw the quiet expectation beneath it, and let the answer come honestly. We walked together, crossing the main quad beside her, felt like stepping into something unreal. The crowd shifted around us without needing to be told, voices rising and falling behind us in bursts of whispered speculation. I kept my head down, overwhelmed by it, while she moved forward with complete ease, untouched by any of it. At one point, a group blocked the path ahead, loud and careless, filling the space without concern. I instinctively prepared to move around them, but she didn't slow. She walked straight through. The change was immediate. Laughter died, movement replaced it, space opening where there had been none. No confrontation, no words, just presence. It was enough. She brought me all the way to the door of my lecture hall. Up close, her voice lowered again, quiet but firm, cutting through everything else. The reminder came with it, steady and unyielding. I was expected to take care of myself now. There was no room left for neglect. A half-joking comment slipped out, but her response carried that same faint trace of amusement, just enough to unsettle me. Then she was gone, turning away with effortless grace, leaving me standing there, watching her disappear into the flow of students. Something had shifted in a way I couldn't undo. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that felt both strange and addictive. Rumors spread quickly, growing louder, more ridiculous with each retelling. They followed me through hallways, across classrooms, weaving stories that had nothing to do with reality. None of it mattered. What existed between us didn't match anything they imagined. She became a constant presence in my life, appearing without warning, fitting into my routine as if she had always been there. Sometimes it was a quiet arrival, a cup of coffee sliding across the table before she took the seat across from me. Sometimes she said nothing at all, simply sitting there, reading while I worked. Her presence changed everything. The fear I had felt that first night faded into something steadier, something grounding. She wasn't just watching anymore. She was there, protective in ways that went beyond anything I expected. It wasn't just about food or sleep. It was the way she created space around me, the way her attention sharpened whenever something felt off. A careless bump in a crowded hallway turned into a moment where her hand found my back instantly, steady and firm, her gaze locking onto the person responsible, until they backed away with hurried apologies. There was a thrill in it, something intoxicating about being guarded so completely. But it was the quieter moments that changed everything. One night, rain poured down hard enough to blur the campus into streaks of gray and shadow. I stood under a narrow awning, arms wrapped around myself, waiting for an opening that never came. Then the rain above me stopped. A dark umbrella shielded the space, cutting off the cold, relentless downpour. I looked up and found her there beside me, coat pulled close against the wind, her presence as steady as ever. I hadn't brought one, she had noticed. "You'll get sick," she said simply, stepping in closer until the umbrella covered us both completely. The space between us vanished, our shoulders brushing, her warmth cutting through the cold that had settled deep into my bones. She told me to come with her, her apartment closer than my dorm, her tone leaving little room for hesitation. I didn't resist. The cold had already drained whatever argument I might have had, and beneath it, there was something else. An unspoken pull toward her world that felt equal parts dangerous and irresistible. We moved through the rain together, close beneath the dark canopy. Water hammered against the fabric above us, loud enough to drown out everything else, wrapping us in a cocoon of sound and isolation. The air was freezing, damp seeping into my skin, but the heat radiating from her body created a sharp contrast that grounded me with every step. Her apartment sat high above the city, perched at the top of a sleek building just off campus. The moment I stepped inside, it felt exactly as I had imagined, and nothing like it at the same time. Expansive and modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows spilling light from the city below into the space. Everything about it was polished, deliberate. Black, gray, and white dominated every surface, paired with expensive materials and abstract art that felt more like a curated display than a lived-in space. It was striking, flawless, and strangely empty, like something designed to be admired rather than inhabited. She told me to get out of my wet clothes, her voice calm as she hung the umbrella by the door. Boots and coat discarded, she moved through the space with quiet familiarity, pointing me toward the bathroom and promising dry clothes. The bathroom alone felt larger than my entire dorm. Marble surfaces gleamed under soft lighting, chrome fixtures reflecting everything back in sharp detail. I peeled off damp fabric, shivering as the cold air hit my skin, the chill lingering stubbornly. A soft knock came soon after, and she cracked the door open just enough to pass me a bundle of clothes. They were unmistakably hers. Loose gray sweatpants that swallowed me whole, forcing me to roll them tight at the waist, and a worn t-shirt that carried her scent. Cedar, smoke, something deeper that clung to the fabric. Pulling them on felt strangely intimate, like stepping into a piece of her life in a way I hadn't expected. When I stepped back out, the apartment had shifted. Warmth spread through the space, a modern fireplace casting soft light across the room. She stood in the kitchen, pouring hot water into 2 mugs. Her movements quieter now, less guarded. She had changed too. The sharp edges were softened, replaced by something more relaxed. Leggings, a loose sweater, a version of her that felt almost unrecognizable compared to the figure everyone feared. Less untouchable, more human. She handed me a mug, steam curling up between us. The warmth seeped into my hands instantly, and when our fingers brushed, it sent a quick, electric spark up my arm that I couldn't ignore. I took a sip, letting the heat settle into me, easing the lingering cold. The space around us felt different now, quieter, more intimate. I commented on it without thinking, the beauty undeniable but the emptiness just as present. She leaned back against the counter, watching me over the rim of her mug, and something in her expression shifted. A quiet laugh slipped out, soft and rare, carrying a hint of something self-aware. The apartment wasn't really hers, not in any meaningful way. It had been arranged before she ever arrived, every detail chosen by someone else. She hadn't changed anything, because there was no reason to. It wasn't a home. Just a place to exist until the next step in her life took over. Her words came slower then, more deliberate. Everything about her future had already been decided, mapped out in a way that left no room for deviation. Expectations waited for her beyond graduation, roles she was meant to fill, responsibilities she hadn't chosen but couldn't escape. There was a weight in the way she said it, something heavy and unspoken beneath the surface. When she looked at me again, the shift was undeniable. The distance she carried so effortlessly was gone, replaced by something rawer, something far more real. Loneliness sat there, deep and unguarded, breaking through the carefully constructed image she showed the world. Her reputation wasn't accidental. It was deliberate, useful. It kept people away, stopped them from wanting things from her she couldn't give. Fear was easier than expectation, easier than being reduced to what she could offer instead of who she was. Something in my chest tightened at that. I stepped closer without thinking, crossing the invisible boundary she always maintained. The distance between us disappeared, and for once, she didn't pull back. I told her she didn't scare me. The reaction was immediate, her breath caught, subtle but unmistakable, her composure slipping just enough to reveal what lay beneath it. She looked down at me, something conflicted flashing across her face. A quiet warning followed, her voice rougher now, stripped of its usual control. She spoke of herself in terms that felt harsh, almost defensive, as if she needed me to understand the parts of her she kept hidden. There was intensity in it, a truth she didn't soften. Her hand lifted slowly, hesitant for the first time, until her fingers brushed against my face. The touch was impossibly gentle, her thumb tracing along my jaw in a way that made everything else fade. The air between us shifted, thickening with something unspoken but undeniable. Her gaze dropped, drawn to my lips, and the space between us narrowed. The tension built quietly, steadily, until it felt impossible to ignore. I leaned into her touch, letting myself be pulled closer, surrendering to the gravity she carried so effortlessly. Her breath brushed against my lips, warm and uneven, and my heart pounded hard enough to drown out everything else. For a moment, nothing else existed. Then the sound of her phone shattered it, sharp, intrusive, cutting through the fragile space we had created. She pulled back instantly, as if burned, the vulnerability vanishing just as quickly as it had appeared. The walls went back up, solid and impenetrable. She grabbed the phone, glanced at the screen, and something in her expression hardened completely. Her voice changed, flattening into something cold and distant. She had to take the call. It was her father. The shift was abrupt, almost jarring. She directed me toward a guest room, telling me to stay the night. The rain wasn't stopping, and neither, it seemed, was the distance she had just forced back between us. Without another glance, she walked away, disappearing behind a closed door, leaving me standing alone in a space that suddenly felt far colder than before. The warmth she carried lingered only in memory. The days that followed stretched into something quietly painful. The connection we had found cracked, leaving distance in its place. She was still there, still present in the same ways. Coffee appearing beside me, silent walks to class. But something fundamental had shifted. The boundary was back. Stronger this time, reinforced with careful precision. Every accidental brush of contact was avoided. Every moment of eye contact shortened before it could deepen. She held herself apart, controlled and distant, as if undoing everything that had nearly happened. She had let me see too much, and it had frightened her. The frustration built slowly, pressing in from all sides. I missed the way she had looked at me, the way her attention had felt focused and consuming. I missed the warmth of her touch, the quiet intensity that had drawn me in so completely. Everything felt unbalanced, uncertain. Every word, every glance became something to analyze, something to hold on to in the hope of finding a way back to where we had been. It unraveled on a Friday night. My roommate dragged me out, determined to pull me back into something normal. Music, noise, people, things that felt distant and unimportant compared to what I couldn't stop thinking about. The party was overwhelming from the moment I stepped inside. Heat, bodies, the smell of alcohol and perfume, blending into something suffocating. The music pulsed through the floor, loud enough to drown out thought. I stayed near the wall, clutching a plastic cup, wishing I were anywhere else. A voice cut through the haze, familiar but unimportant. Someone from class, leaning too close, his words slurred and careless. His attention lingered in ways that made my skin crawl, his tone shifting from casual to invasive without warning. He stepped closer, blocking any easy escape, his grip tightening around my arm. The words that followed were worse, mucking, dismissive, reducing everything to something cheap and ugly. Sloan's name twisted into something unrecognizable, something meant to provoke, to belittle. Heat flared through me, sharp and immediate. Anger replaced the unease, cutting through it cleanly. The moment shifted, and everything that came after was about to change. My pulse slammed against my throat, panic rising fast and sharp. I tried to wrench my arm free, but his grip tightened, fingers digging in with unexpected strength. I told him to let go, my voice unsteady despite the force behind it. He only leaned closer, his breath sour and suffocating, his words slurring into something that made my stomach twist. Then everything snapped. 1 second he was crowding me, the next he was gone, ripped away with such force it barely registered. His body slammed into a nearby table, sending cups and bottles crashing to the floor in a violent scatter of noise and glass. The music cut out abruptly, leaving behind a silence so heavy it felt suffocating. Sloan stood between us. There was nothing restrained about her now. No distance, no composure carefully held in place. She looked dangerous in a way that made the entire room freeze. Her chest rose and fell sharply. Her hands clenched so tight the tension showed in every line of her body. Her gaze locked onto him where he struggled on the floor, and the fury burning there was unlike anything I had seen before. Cold, controlled, devastating. When she spoke, her voice dropped into something low and lethal, quiet enough that it should have been lost in the room. Yet every word carried with absolute clarity. It wasn't a threat thrown in anger. It was a promise. The effect was immediate. Whatever defiance he might have had vanished, replaced by raw fear. He nodded frantically, scrambling to his feet before bolting for the door, desperate to put distance between himself and her. She didn't spare him another glance. Her attention snapped back to me, and the shift was jarring. The rage fractured, giving way to something far more chaotic. Panic, sharp and unguarded. Her hands hovered near me, uncertain for the first time, as if she didn't trust herself to touch without causing harm. Her voice shook when she asked if I was okay. I managed to steady my breath enough to answer, the adrenaline still coursing through me. Around us, the room remained frozen, every eye locked onto the scene. She didn't care. Her hand closed around my wrist, firm but careful, and she pulled me with her. The crowd parted instantly, fear clearing a path without resistance. She didn't slow until we were outside, the cool night air hitting hard after the suffocating heat of the party. She kept going, pulling me down the street until the noise and chaos faded behind us. Only when we reached the dim glow of a flickering street lamp did she finally stop. Her grip loosened, and she dragged both hands through her hair, pacing in tight, restless movements. The control she carried so effortlessly was slipping, replaced by something raw and unfiltered. She spoke under her breath, frustration and self-blame tangling together, her words spilling out like she couldn't stop them. I stepped closer, the tension of the past weeks finally breaking loose. The distance she had forced between us, the silence, the restraint, it all collided at once. I pushed back, refusing to let her take responsibility for something that wasn't hers. That stopped her. She turned sharply, her gaze locking onto mine, intensity flaring again but different this time. Not anger. Something deeper, more volatile. She knew she didn't control me. That wasn't the point. What she couldn't handle was the thought of someone else crossing a line, of someone looking at me the way he had. The words came out rough, unfiltered, carrying a heat that felt dangerously close to something else entirely. The frustration inside me snapped, the distance she had created. The way she pulled close only to shut me out again. It all poured out at once. The contradiction of her actions, the way she claimed my safety while refusing anything real between us. The walls she kept rebuilding no matter how close we got. Her expression changed as the words landed. The anger drained away, leaving something stripped down and exposed. The silence that followed was heavy, filled only with the sound of our breathing. When she finally spoke, the truth came out without defense. She was afraid. The admission cut through everything. She stepped closer, her hands gripping my arms, holding on like she needed something solid to anchor herself. Her voice carried a weight I had never heard before, every word edged with something fragile. She believed she would ruin me, that everything she touched eventually broke, that her life was already set on a path she couldn't escape. Letting me in meant dragging me into it, pulling me into something she saw as inevitable damage. She saw me as something untouched, something worth protecting, even if it meant pushing me away. The realization hit hard, all the distance, all the restraint. It wasn't indifference, it was fear. I saw through it completely, saw the loneliness beneath the control, the way she kept everyone at a distance not because she didn't care, but because caring came with consequences she didn't trust herself to handle. Emotion broke loose, sharp and overwhelming. I grabbed her coat, pulling her down before she could retreat again, before she could rebuild those walls one more time. I didn't give her space to think. The moment closed fast, every bit of tension, every unspoken feeling crashing together all at once. For a split second she froze, caught off guard, her body rigid against mine. Then something shifted, a quiet, broken sound escaped her, and the control she clung to gave way. Her arms wrapped around me, pulling me closer, holding on with a force that left no doubt. The distance disappeared completely, replaced by something intense and consuming. Nothing about it was hesitant. It was everything that had been building between us finally breaking free. Raw, overwhelming, impossible to hold back any longer. The world outside that moment fell away, leaving only the closeness, the heat, the undeniable certainty of it. When it ended, the air felt different. She didn't let go. Her forehead rested against mine, her breathing uneven, her composure fractured in a way no one else had ever seen. There was a tremor in her hands, subtle but real. I told her the truth as clearly as I could. She hadn't destroyed anything. She had been there when I needed someone most. She had pulled me back when I was falling apart, given me something steady to hold on to. She didn't take from me. She gave. Her eyes lifted to mine. The storm inside them softened into something open and uncertain, hope breaking through where fear had been. The choice stood between us, real and undeniable. There was no hesitation left in me. I chose her, every part of her, even the parts she tried to hide. The reaction was immediate. The last of her restraint cracked completely, emotion breaking through in a way that left her exposed. She pulled me into her, holding on tightly, like letting go wasn't an option anymore. I held her just as firmly. Everything changed after that. There was no more hiding, no more distance forced between us. When the week began again, she walked beside me openly, her hand intertwined with mine, completely indifferent to the attention it drew. The whispers didn't stop. If anything, they grew louder, shifting from fear into something else. Curiosity, fascination, disbelief. None of it mattered. The version of me that had collapsed in the library felt distant now. like something left behind. The pressure, the exhaustion, the constant push toward breaking, it no longer defined everything. I still worked, still pushed myself, but there was balance now. There was someone making sure I stopped when I needed to, someone who refused to let me disappear into the same patterns that had nearly destroyed me. And in the quiet moments, away from everything else, the empty spaces in her world began to change too, slowly turning into something that finally felt lived in. Books began to gather in quiet, unplanned piles across the apartment, left open on the counter or stacked beside the couch. My worn sweatshirts slowly found their place beside her perfectly tailored blazers, the contrast no longer out of place but natural, like the space itself had shifted to make room for both of us. The silence that once felt distant and hollow changed into something warm, something lived in. It carried the soft rhythm of shared breathing, the faint hum of the city beyond the glass, and the quiet comfort of not needing to fill every moment with words. It wasn't effortless. She still held on to that instinct to shield, to step in and take control before anything could go wrong. I pushed back just as fiercely, refusing to disappear into her protection, holding on to my independence with everything I had. She had to learn that I didn't need someone to fight my battles for me. I needed someone who stood beside me instead. And she had to unlearn the habit of control, the rigid structure she had built her life around, allowing herself to loosen her grip and trust that she didn't have to carry everything alone. We clashed because of it, but every time, the tension broke the same way. Anger dissolved into closeness, frustration giving way to something softer. Apologies came quietly, not out of obligation, but because neither of us wanted to lose what we had. Each argument only reinforced it further, that we were tied together in a way that couldn't be undone. By the time finals week of our junior year arrived, the weight of everything we had built settled in fully. Campus felt hollow, drained by stress and exhaustion. Students moved like ghosts, buried under deadlines and expectations. I sat on the floor of her living room, surrounded by scattered notes and textbooks, trying to force information into a mind already stretched too thin. The pressure was familiar, but it didn't feel as suffocating as it once had. She sat behind me on the couch, absorbed in her own work, pages of dense reports spread out in front of her. The quiet between us wasn't empty. It was steady, grounding. A heavy sigh slipped out of me as I rubbed my eyes, exhaustion creeping back in. I leaned my head against the edge of the couch near her leg. Not even thinking about it, her response was immediate. Her hand left her work, fingers slipping into my hair with practiced ease. The touch was gentle, soothing, her movements slow as she worked the tension out of my scalp. I leaned into it instinctively, letting the stress ease out of my body bit by bit. She murmured something soft, her voice low and close, a quiet reminder that I was pushing too hard again. I answered lazily, eyes still closed, falling back into the familiar rhythm of our shared jokes, the ones that carried memories of where everything had started. She shifted above me, leaning down just enough to press her lips to the top of my head, the gesture so natural now that it didn't startle me anymore. Her voice softened completely, stripped of every edge the world still expected from her. There was nothing cold left in it when she spoke like that. She believed in me with a certainty I hadn't always been able to give myself. The threat that followed was light, familiar, something she had said before in different ways. Rest wasn't optional, not anymore. I turned my head to look at her, catching the expression she rarely let anyone else see. The intensity was still there, but it wasn't sharp or distant. It was open, steady, entirely focused on me. The person everyone feared didn't exist in that moment. There was only her. The girl who showed up without warning just to sit beside me. The one who noticed every small detail I overlooked. The one who refused to let me fall apart. Even when I tried to push past my limits, a quiet challenge slipped out, light but intentional. Her reaction was instant. That familiar spark returned to her eyes, something deeper flickering beneath the surface. She stood without hesitation, closing the distance between us in a single smooth motion. Her arms slid beneath me, lifting me effortlessly, just like she had the first time our worlds collided. But nothing about it felt the same. There was no fear now, no uncertainty. I wrapped my arms around her without thinking, settling against her, pressing close in a way that felt natural. The familiar scent of her surrounded me, grounding and steady, something I had come to associate with safety more than anything else. She carried me down the hall, the city outside fading into nothing behind the thick glass walls. The world beyond didn't matter in that moment. She laid me down gently, careful even in her strength, and followed close enough that the space between us disappeared again. The closeness lingered, quiet and certain, something that no longer needed to be questioned. And in that stillness, something became clear. The world could keep its version of her. The rumors, the fear, the myth built around her name. It didn't touch what existed here, in the quiet spaces no one else saw, because behind all of it, beneath everything she let people believe, she wasn't untouchable. She was mine, and I was hers. Two lives that should have stayed separate, colliding anyway, pulling each other out of the darkness we had both been stuck in. The chaos of how it began no longer mattered. Every misstep, every moment of tension, every barrier we had broken through had led to this. A place where everything finally felt right. Where nothing needed to be forced or proven. Where, for the first time, everything simply was.